The Spin-off Podcast Network.
This episode is brought to you by Temptations Cat Treats. Your cat will come running for the perfectly irresistible Temptations Creamy Puree and Temptations Lickable Spoon Cat Treats. The best time to feed lickable cat treats to your cat is anytime. Feed by hand for a playful moment, in a bowl for a creamy treat, or as a topper to make mealtime fun. Visit temptationstreats.com to learn more.
This episode is brought to you by Loom by Atlassian. Are you feeling stuck at work? Get your team unstuck with Loom video messaging and move work forward. Use Loom to simultaneously record both your screen and yourself to share a quick update, provide feedback, train a colleague, and everything in between. Plus, add Loom AI to your meetings for instant written notes and recordings. Try Loom today at Loom.com. That's LOOM.com.
Kia ora folks, Te Aihe Butler here, producer for Gone by Lunchtime. Just a heads up, this live podcast was recorded on the evening of Wednesday, 9th of April. So if Donald Trump has done something unhinged recently and it doesn't get mentioned, that's why. Thanks for listening and enjoy.
Tēnā koutou katoa. 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 Welcome to Gone by Lunchtime.
I don't know where we go from there. It was thanks to Hayden Eastman Mine, who just informed me that he wants his performance band to be known as Hayden and the Reciprocal Tariffs. Hayden is a proper musician, and I want to make the offer to him now that if he has a gig coming up, we're happy to do a little bit of podcast at the top, just to, set the mood. Thanks also to cult hero Te Aihe Butler for that musical arrangement, sound design. Proof, apart from anything else, that beneath that angelic facade lurks some quite twisted demonic shit, No mo haere mai, I'm Toby Manhire. And she's Annabelle Lee-Mather.
Kia ora, I am Annabelle Lee-Mather. I'm not Dua Lipa. Just for clarity.
If you were, Christopher Luxon would be in the front row watching, I gather. How are you? Annabelle, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good.
Yeah,
Hi.
okay. Yeah, good. Yeah, good.
Kia ora.
Ben Thomas, how are you?
Kia ora, I'm good. I'm hopped up on pseudoephedrine, thanks to Peters-Seymour.
Yeah, that's true. I've had a couple
It's all been worth it.
Since it was re-legalised, I've been hopped up on pseudoephedrine most days. He also made it easier to get refills of ADHD medicine for, adult diagnosed creative geniuses like me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think in many ways tonight is brought to you by the leader of the ACT Party.
Yeah, thank you, David Seymour. Some good news. I've got a few quiz questions lined up for this evening. Let's start with some high-level mathematics, some number wang. The question is, what is x divided by y divided by 2?
Is it the formula to make a direwolf?
No. Ben, any thoughts?
I'm assuming that y is less than or greater than x, and that it's therefore a diminishing function.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that it's the function of probability over time that Winston Peters ends his parliamentary career without saying the word penis. There's a big dip this week when he said pussy.
Do you see what he said?
And every time he brings up women's bathrooms, we're getting closer and closer to an extinction event. But
no, it's not that. Do you know what it is really?
Isn't it Grok's formula for
Yeah.
reciprocal tariffs?
Yes, it is. It's the formula, as I'm sure all of you have encountered in the last week, for this blanket so-called reciprocal tariffs, as announced on Liberation Day. Each country's US trade deficit divided by its exports to the US with a minimum level of 10%, which is where New Zealand landed, although a couple of countries managed not to have any tariffs at all, like Russia and North Korea. As far as I can tell, it was either Grok or ChatGPT or macro data refinement that came up with that formula, and it sent markets into meltdown around the world on a level that's on a par with the global financial crisis and then COVID-19. Those two events, of course, being triggered by something other than the US president's whim, which means that Donald Trump can now count himself on a parallel with the subprime mortgage crash and Wuhan lab leak, or whatever it was. Have you been watching all this like I have, Annabelle, with your chin on the floor?
I haven't been able to look away. And in terms of our 10% tariff, I think, given he basically owes his presidency to John Key's endorsement, it seems incredibly unfair.
Yeah, I think that was a big factor. What about you, Ben?
I've actually been checking the Dow Jones as soon as I wake up. I don't have any shares. I just like being on my phone, you know? It's Twitter's gotten pretty bad, so it's basically just refreshing, market updates.
Right, yeah. I looked at my KiwiSaver the other day, which was a big mistake, which does tell you that the markets aren't just about people like you who are on the Dow Jones.
Even Bitcoin is down. Trump's economic reforms, his economic reforms are so bad that they're even touching the imaginary economy of the American right.
What about the New Zealand response? It seemed to me that yesterday, in what appeared to be a coordinated response, Nicola Willis and what's the other fellow's name? Christopher Luxon, both kind of up the rhetoric in terms of not going Donald Trump's an idiot, but saying that these tariffs are a disaster for the global economy. Is that the right way to go? What's the right place to sit in terms of that tricky balance of condemning what's going on and not wanting to make Donald mad?
Yeah, again, if you graphed it out, there would be this sort of, you'd be like softly, 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 and then you hit a point at which it doesn't really matter anymore. I think, look, it's the right thing for them to do politically in a New Zealand sense. If there's one thing that this government hasn't really had in its favour, it's a national crisis. Nothing's exploded, nothing's sort of collapsed, and that's always a good opportunity to
School lunches have exploded.
I was reading, did you see, apparently we've all got about a teaspoon worth of plastics in our brain now? So, I mean, melted plastic is basically part of a balanced diet now, you know. You've got to, like, I feel like this is a winner for the ACT Party. But, it's you know, this is a good opportunity for them to make reassuring noises, talk about how they've got a plan. And, you know, in terms of the economy, great news, given the last 18 months, where they can say, we're doing our best because of these terrible economic circumstances that are the responsibility of someone else.
Yeah. So it's laying down a kind of protective barrier such that when they said, yes, we said it was going to be the year of growth, but it's not our fault that we didn't achieve that, should that come. What do you reckon, Annabelle? Where's the right line to take? I mean, the Keir Starmer, Mark Carney in Canada, and Albanese in Australia have all made some gains, it seems, by speaking up against Donald Trump. Would you like to see more of that?
I mean, I'm not an economist, but I do have a Sharesies account, so I'm quite knowledgeable about this stuff.
How's that looking?
Terrible.
Yeah.
I think it's been interesting to see Hipkins criticising Willis and Luxon for the position that they're taking. I think she said, you know, stay calm, don't overreact. And I think it's probably at this moment the right position to take. I do wonder if Hipkins would be following his own advice if he was in government. I think the silver lining perhaps in the tariffs, if you're not a fan of Donald Trump, is there's been a lot of speculation about a third term and changing the constitution so he can do that. But I imagine that after this, it would be probably unlikely that he'd get voted back in again.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for me, the silver lining is watching all the oligarch billionaires absolutely piss their pants. The guy that they got elected is destroying their precious billions. Ben, you look like you're about to say something.
I was like, oh no, not by billions. And look, it's got wider fallout as well, right? I mean, as it turns out, unwinding the entire post-war global economy also has geopolitical implications. The fact that, you know, bond yields have been increasing precipitously. And that's normally where money goes, you know, US Treasury bonds are normally where money goes when the rest of the world is so sort of hazardous and seen as risky. You're like the last people we can rely on, the US government. And now that's Donald Trump, right? And so everything's being sort of reordered. And that's why we've seen this sort of push, you know, this sudden rhetoric about, and indeed a commitment to increase defence spending by, $12 billion. Over the sort of medium term. You know, there is this sort of idea of, you know, where do we fit in the modern, you know, in the new world that's being sort of sorted out. I heard somebody on RNZ sort of suggest that we shouldn't be investing money in weapons. We should be putting that money into sort of deeper and stronger ties with our Pacific neighbours instead, which might be a good idea to get on good terms with the new provincial governor of Zealandia, Mark Brown, in the new capital of New Zealand, Rarotonga.
One thing that won't change in terms of the world order is that, you know, the poor African nations will continue to be treated like crap. And when you look at the tariffs getting put on places like Madagascar, and Cambodia and Vietnam, like these are Trump has been talking about how horribly America's been treated and been taken advantage of, and then you look at places like Vietnam and Cambodia that had the bejesus bombed out of them by the US, and they've had a huge tariff slapped on them. So yes, while there's some shifting around at the top, the people down the bottom will remain down the bottom.
So, and it does also seem consistent with that the extent to which one country or another is sycophantic towards Donald Trump makes no skerrick of a difference anyway. Should there be, why is there not a movement for a bunch of countries around the world to kind of link together and try and send a concerted message that this is disastrous and retrograde and catastrophic.
It's early days yet, eh? That might still happen. I think people, I mean, the thing with him is that he's so unpredictable, everything is so uncertain, that I think people are just waiting to see what happens over the next couple of weeks. But I wouldn't be surprised if we do see that happening, like nations grouping together to, oppose his position.
All right, let's have another quiz question. The next question is, what happens in 52 days?
Gemini season.
Correct. What else happens in 52 days?
At the current rate, my KiwiSaver hits about 0.
Yeah, that's true. What else happens in 52 days?
Is that the coronation?
It's the coronation.
The anointing.
Call it that, the anointing, the handover, the changeover. This is, of course, when the halfway point in the current government is hit, and through some ceremonial process, David Seymour will replace Winston Peters as Deputy Prime Minister. I've been trying to work out what kind of form it might take, and looked for inspiration to some great scenes from cinematic history. Would you like to share with you and see whether or not you think any of these are on the money? The first one is, will David Seymour rise up like Simba on Pride Rock? It's David Seymour there. It's the future. So that's the first possibility.
Does that make Winston, what's the uncle called? Uncle Scar or Uncle Claw or whatever?
Scarf Claw?
Scar
Claw?
Yeah, something like that. Eh?
Yeah.
It's giving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Second option, one of the most powerful transitions in film, where mother and daughter swap bodies after eating magical fortune cookies in Freaky Friday. Can you see that?
Okay, that's enough.
I don't know which one is Winston and which one is Seymour. I think probably David Seymour is Lindsay Lohan there, and Winston is Jamie Lee Curtis. There's been a bit of scuttlebutt around. I think Tim Hurdle mentioned it on a RNZ 9 to noon thing the other day, that Winston Peters might, after vacating the Deputy Prime Minister, jump over to Washington and have a nice time. Do you think that's plausible? That he might?
No.
Because it's one of the crazy things about Winston Peters is that I think seems to me that 3 or 4 elections ago we're going, oh, well, the man is getting on. This could be his last. And now that doesn't even come up. He's going to keep going forever. Do you think Winston Peters has just got another election, then another election?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
You just keep
Absolutely.
going. Yeah. What about Christopher Luxon? His sustaining political philosophy is mojo, as we know, and his personal mojo seems to have been restored after the Indian trip, was it? I don't know, but he seemed to be flailing a little bit, or just not really having a nice time. But in the last few weeks, he seems to have got back some of that. I don't know, skipping a step.
I mean, look, his background is that Spanish for his coalition partners? His background is marketing, right? He's always got very good message discipline, overall in terms of where he's pitching, and it's sort of kind of phrased sometimes in interviews. But, as simple as economic growth is as a message, it's one that's sort of been working, especially because they've got a lot of things to show for it. Not in terms of sort of outcomes yet, or better economic indicators, but in terms of activity, right? You can't turn this stuff. As he would say, you can't turn a ship, you can't turn the tanker around like immediately, particularly if you're in a semi-boiled ocean.
With big rocks.
With big rocks in the way,
rocks.
yeah. It's a hazardous navigation task.
Yeah.
But look, I think he's getting there in terms of the sort of the activity, the messaging, very busy all across government with economic growth announcements of varying worth. Some very good, some pretty marginal, but it's I think he's kind of back, and you can sort of see it in the influence. I've heard that public service leaders have started using Luxonisms in meetings. They've been, he's a thought leader, right? The public service has been talking about gripping up problems. Andrew Bailey gripped up one staff member on the upper arm, and he's a man whose message is getting through right now.
Incredible.
I think he had a good week. He went to India. He had a great week there. The Reid Research poll was done the same week. He's come back and it's all tariffs. And Peters got us into a pretty good position, to be fair. I think he did the right thing in the lead up to tariffs. So, compared to other places like Australia, we're in a pretty good position. But he is by no means out of the woods, in my opinion.
What about, Annabelle, to Ben's point about the alternative coalition? Thinking about whether it's that weird fungus metaphor that you were employing before, Ben, or the older one of the boat. National can say our coalition of chaos is less chaos than your coalition of chaos, can't they? I mean, it is quite a difficult sell for the Labour Party to say, yep, here we go, it's us lot and the Greens and TPM, here we go.
They are going to have a really cohesive strategy, the three of them, going into the next election and figure out early what some bottom lines are, I think, because you're right. But at the same time, if you look at how well the opposition numbers are holding up, I think people are open to the argument.
I guess the question is whether or not that can sustain them into an election year. I mean, for example, David Parker is exiting, which I think is a loss for Labour, but not necessarily related to this, but they haven't yet decided, let alone announced what their tax policy is, Labour, right? Like, doesn't necessarily suggest a government in waiting.
Do you think that's why David Parker left?
No, I don't. But
you don't think it's because they're still refusing to budge on their tax policy and he's like, I'm out.
Maybe.
Done.
Maybe.
Over it.
Over it, yeah. I didn't get that sense from his demeanour, but it is something that needs to be, laid out, doesn't it? And whether or not they have the cojones to go for a capital gains tax properly or not. They will, won't they? Will they?
It doesn't matter anymore. God bless Labour, but they've over the last 11 or 12 years, they've spent the capital gains tax revenue about 20 times over on health, education, school lunches, whatever. But it's really a diminishing returns thing. I mean, oh yeah, cool. I'll pay capital gains on my shares right now. I'll pay capital gains on my bond here. We've left
That's the perfect time to introduce it, though, isn't it?
Well, yeah, when things are low, yeah. But, we're entering into a very different, if Chris Bishop is successful, you will not see, 60% gains in house prices over 2 years. The thing is, the boomers got away with the loot, right? COVID-19 and the house price increase was the final Ocean's 11 style heist where the boomers got away with all of the capital gains. You can whack any tax on now you want. And it's just, it's just this kind of little drip feed. It's a real example of sort of fighting the last war.
This episode is brought to you by Chevrolet. When you have 4 new tires, every drive feels fresh. Right now, buy 3 select tires and get 1 for just $1 during the Chevrolet Certified Service Fresh Start Tire event. Visit Chevrolet.com/service offers or see dealer for full details. At participating U.S. GM dealers only, highest or equal value tire will be $1. Offer ends 5/31/2025. Not available with other offers.
Anyone can follow. It takes something special to be an original, which is why the 2025 Lincoln Navigator SUV arrives with new ways of surrounding you in luxury, including the ultra-wide 48-inch panoramic display and the multi-sensory Lincoln Rejuvenate experience. A true original never stops evolving. So meet the 2025 Navigator, the original that's all new and better than ever. Learn more at Lincoln.com. Lincoln and Navigator are trademarks of Ford or its affiliates.
Get ready for Netflix's gripping new medical drama, Pulse. Set in a cutting-edge Miami trauma center, third-year resident Dr. Danny Sims is unexpectedly thrust into a promotion when beloved chief resident Dr. Xander Phillips gets suspended. Then, with the emotional and physical stakes at their highest, a storm will push the hospital and its residents to their limits. Witness how life can change in a heartbeat when you're operating under pressure. Watch Pulse, only on Netflix.
Now, listen, I can't help but notice there's an empty chair right here. And I think we need to find somebody to fill that chair. I don't know who.
Someone sassy and smart.
Someone sassy and smart.
Someone who's mean about politicians.
Mean about politicians.
Someone who can run really fast backwards in high heels.
Ooh.
While waving a microphone in someone's face.
Ben's already here. Someone who's got some experience of reporting from America and seeing American politics close up. Mm-hmm. Who could that be, do you think?
Have you got some slides?
What about Rebecca Wright? Is Rebecca Wright here? Ladies and gentlemen, Rebecca Wright. What a treat to have you here, just by chance in the audience.
Yeah, just swung by. A couple of pics in my pocket.
Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
You've appeared on numerous New Zealand television current affairs politics shows, some of which still exist.
I was going to say, I think they're all gone now, except for one.
All of them? Wow.
Just one.
What are you up to now?
Every time somebody asks me that question, I think I should be doing something. I should be really doing something, but I've been taking a break. So
Great.
When everything sort of imploded, shall we say, last year, I thought, I don't want to dive straight into the next thing and get into that cycle of working and sort of, doing the day by day again. Everything is pretty messed up. So I just want to take a breath, think about what's next, what do people want, where is the media going? It seemed pretty grim there for quite a while. It still looks pretty turbulent, but I know that people want in-depth content. I know that they want things like this. I love things like this, conversations about things that matter. And so I've been putting my energies towards creating sort of something new. So I'm still doing that. I've got 2 things in development which, I'm hopeful can fill that space a little bit. Yeah, so stay tuned, as Donald Trump would say.
Speaking of...
Yes.
You were reporting for TVNZ on the US, based in New York, moving around the country, spending some time in DC, and during the first Trump presidency, weren't you? So you were sort of beholding this unimaginable, bizarre stuff going down. How does that compare with the unimaginable, bizarre stuff going down in Trump 2.0? Is it how different does it seem?
Well, I thought it would be more of the same. I thought it would be more sort of chaos and heat and noise and drama and intrigue. And it has been all of those things, but it has been supercharged, This time he seems to know better what he's doing or how to do it. He had, I think, when I got there, the House, the Senate and the executive, and I don't think he got any legislation passed in the first 2 years. He went to his executive orders, but nothing big like he's trying to do now. So he is unleashed. He has been plotting his revenge, and we're seeing that executed in real time. And we're seeing a lot more things sort of happening with the dismantling of the federal government. With the tariffs, obviously, are huge. So he seems to be much more effective this time around than he was before. But I still don't think he has a strategy. So he does things, but there is no real plan. There is no plan B. There is no next step. No, none of us know, I don't think, at the moment, what these tariffs are for. Are they to devalue the US dollar? Does he want more money for tax cuts for Americans? It's unclear what the strategy is, and that is because I think there isn't one.
I mean, it's kind of staggering, almost comical that he, immediately having announced all those things with that big list, went off and played golf for 2 days.
Yeah.
And then,
on brand.
Yeah, and there was that amazing clip, did you see this, of him jumping on Air Force One, and the first question being about how he went in the golf. And he said, "Yeah, I played the golf. I won the tournament. And that was the thing that had been apparently preoccupying him. Whereas in the first term, he was said to be glued to the markets and seeing them as a kind of measure of his success."
Well, he won't want to be glued to the markets at the moment if that is still a barometer for him for how he's going, because they're all freaking out on day by day. We're all watching it in real time. But that makes me come back to, and it is interesting watching, the markets react to his policy, that volatility that we haven't seen before. Like you said, the billionaires coming out. I think Warren Buffett is the only one who's called this and put he's got cash reserves at the moment. So he, again, could see what was coming. But I don't think Trump is listening to anyone. I think Trump is his main advisor, his only advisor. He's surrounded himself by this highly unusual group of people, to put it politely. And even Ivanka and Jared have been like, no, we're going to sit this one out. We're going to stay in Florida. I think they're in Florida now. They got kicked out of New York. So they're down there trying to forget about the whole sorry business of term one. So I don't think this is Trump unbridled. He has nothing to lose. He has, the criminal justice system hasn't been able to rein him in. 2 impeachment proceedings, the same again. An assassination attempt, he survived that. He literally thinks, this is his divine gift from God, that he is a divine sort of president now. And that is what we're seeing.
Yeah.
I don't know where it ends. I don't think anybody does, and I think if they, a theory that may be correct today will be blown out of the water tomorrow.
I think it's really interesting that, the right in America, and also Winston Peters here in a more garbled way, because he doesn't seem to quote it correctly, talk about, say, cultural Marxism a lot, which is the sort of conspiracy theory about how various intellectuals in the 1960s sort of all peeled off, to do a caper, like Adorno will bring down the institution of marriage while, we've got somebody else here like bringing down free market capitalism. And, then we'll all meet later in the day and rendezvous, And it's become sort of synonymous with the idea of postmodernism, the idea that you're sort of untethered from, objective truth.
Reality.
Winston in his speech, he referred to Marxism 5 times, but it was sort of global, cultural, social Marxism, and so I think he had sort of heard words kind of in America and sort of, didn't have so I'm not accusing him of, an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory or anything, but it is interesting that it's really, that actually postmodern politics has reached its sort of perfect point with the so-called conservative right in America, where it really is just untethered from everything, right?
Yeah, even from the history of the Republican Party.
Yeah, well, like even from the reality of the markets, Currently you've got sort of, MAGA people saying, stock markets aren't even real. The economy's not real, the dollar's not real, and it's just this sort of, it's like you are just floating around in his mind. It's like The Cell, but too old a reference? Yeah. Nobody saw the Jennifer Lopez classic?
And things happen. So one thing that I was thinking about when you're talking about that, Ben, is that the other thing that I have to keep coming back to when people ask me about Donald Trump and being re-elected is that this isn't random. it didn't happen by accident. He, people was written off. He spent 4 years in political oblivion. But, he was last seen at the White House suggesting people inject bleach during COVID. People thought he was gone. But he appeals to the majority right now of voting Americans. That is not random. There is discontent in the political system in the United States. These people do not feel connected to Washington. They do not think that they have their best interests at heart, or even recognise that they have interests at all. So it's not random that he was put there. He was voted in, and until somebody starts to think about and try and understand why, and reach out to those people and sort of bring them back, or bring them into the tent, acknowledge them in some way, it's hard to say where it ends. I remember interviewing Madeleine Albright about this, and it was during the first Trump administration. And I said, what are you doing after this upset against Hillary Clinton and the Trump, sort of administration now? We were right in the thick of it. What are you doing to understand where the Democrats got it so badly wrong, how they lost auto workers, for example? They lost big swathes of their base during that election. And she looked at me like, well, what? Because the battle lines had been drawn so fiercely that they weren't even reaching over anymore. It was more like, telling everybody how bad it is, look at how bad it is, instead of, connecting and reaching out to those people.
Well, that vacuum is very apparent now, isn't it? And you look at the response from the Democrats in the joint session Congress a couple of weeks ago, and they were holding up little signs saying, "We don't," you kind of think, "Jesus, is that all you got?" Yeah. Zapping back from Trump to Winston Peters, you've had some very interesting,
close encounters,
electrifying encounters, as you say, with Winston Peters. The one that I remember. Well, I remember quite recently, towards the end of News Hub Nation, you did a fascinating interview with him. But the one I remember going back a few years before that was, I think, for Campbell Live, when you pursued Winston Peters through the Auckland airport. Tell us about, encounters with Winston Peters and your kind of grand theory of the Winston Peters endurance.
I loved that because he had put out a press release, and during one of these State of the Nation speeches, he must have been in Parliament at the time, but perhaps I was Auckland based. I can't remember if he was in power or in opposition. But anyway, he had said Auckland is a city of sin, and that basically it was being taken over by triad gangs, and immigration was to blame for this. And he spoke in very sort of hyperbolic terms about all of this. And I had rung him and said, well, okay, can you take me and show me where these people are or these things exist? And he said, yes. And I thought... And I thought, okay, we'll get the camera, And so slowly, over the course of the week, he backed out, of course. And so I thought, no, I'm going to go to the airport and talk to him about this.
And tail him until you found it.
Yeah. And so we met him at the airport, and I can just remember saying, welcome back to Sin City, Mr. Peters. And it was all on from there. It was like a blur. And he'd started trying to whack me with his newspaper at one point, which I really loved. And then I heard Tissue of Lies come out, and I thought, jackpot, bingo, But the point was, he loved it as much as I enjoyed the sort of ride. And he actually got into this taxi. It just went round and round the airport. We're trying to pin him down on this issue. And he got into the taxi and he laughed, and then he rang me for another go. So yeah, it's sport, but I do think that underneath that, right? So it was sport, it was electrifying, it was entertaining, but it also blew out of the water the stuff that he'd been peddling, that about immigration from China at this time, which now you think he's the foreign minister, And this was not all that long ago. But he blows through issues like that, and he can tap into us, any sort of discontent with the major parties and extract 7% out of it, and we've seen that over and over and over and over again.
On the media, and you seem to, talking about your own projects, have a certain amount of optimistic, which is probably a necessary delusion.
Yeah. It's happier that way.
How do you feel about it now? Because there is, we were talking about this before, and with the removal of things like News Hub Nation, which you hosted, there are fewer interrogations of politicians than there were before, in one sense. What's your view on that?
I feel that deeply, actually, because those long-form interviews, it's an arena, and often the balance of power is really swung towards politicians in terms of access, and then in terms of the time that you have with them. But when you're able to sit down for 25 minutes, 30 minutes, and really hone in on a couple of issues, that is of value for people, because they get to see in an extended period of time sort of, the depth of thinking around a policy. They get to see and get to know that politician a little bit better, how they handle pressure, if they're able to tell the truth, and sort of still sell that, or if they obfuscate and move around it. It's a really good test and barometer of a politician for a voting public. So Q&A is still doing that. Jack does a fantastic job, but there should be more places that we can see that, and it's a shame that show in particular is gone. But I think that people still want that style of reporting. People are watching more than they ever have before. It's just they're not doing it in the same ways anymore on the television, for example. So I am optimistic about the future, but I think there's an appetite. I love to see everybody here tonight. I love listening to all of the different podcasts and platforms that are providing, that sort of material on a weekly basis. It's not easy, but I think there is a real appetite for it. It would just look and feel a little different.
And the clock is ticking. There's about 18 months for someone to establish themselves as New Zealand's Joe Rogan to determine the 2026 election.
It might be Winston Peters.
I thought it's going to be someone we've never heard of, who's like doing law at AUT and has like a largely vegan diet and goes to Les Mills, and
that is where I think it's heading, though.
I'm curious to know, because when you do a job like News Hub Nation, you have to consume so much media. You're constantly on, constantly checking the headlines, eating everything, analysing it. What's your relationship like now in terms of political news coverage?
I am on a detox, I love doing that. I used to do that when I came home from America for a month over summer. I would turn off all the notifications on my phone. I would completely switch off and sort of reset and recalibrate, because I think it is easy to get really down all of the rabbit holes. And there are a lot of them in politics, and particularly, here at the moment and in the United States. So I switched off. I still read a lot of analysis. I love that. I can't give that up. But I'm not as tuned into the day by day of what's going on. And so I love that, because then after about 6 months, something will happen and I'll be like, that's bullshit. And it's like, and that is why. And you get really good clarity about what you're looking at. You can let a lot of stuff go. You don't need to bark at every car, but you can also see the pieces much more clearly. Who's up, who's down, the high level stuff. And I think that there's, that's important rather than all the time the minutiae.
Annabelle, you had a question for Rebecca, which was to do with athleticism and other reporters. I don't want to steal your question. It's a great question.
Hold on. Yes?
Oh, no, we just were curious to know if there was like a running race between you and Paddy and...
Oh, yeah. There has been, actually.
Tova. Who
yes.
You said Jack and your question.
In Parliament.
Jack is the runner.
And Mihi with a hockey stick.
Yeah. Who would take it?
Yeah.
But it has to be sort of skirting around the the caucus corridors and stuff.
Well, we've all done that, actually. And we were like your diagram, Ben. We're all moving in the same direction towards the same goal. But I think Paddy would take it because he's got the crazy energy. You don't want to get too close.
Yeah.
Because it could swing around and vacillate wildly and you'd end up in trouble.
Yeah.
And he's also still working out how and where to point the microphone.
Do you think Paddy was scarier when he was like the scourge of the gallery, or now that he's got like a positive mental attitude?
I mean, it's difficult to say, isn't it? I do love thinking back to where we started because Duncan, Paddy and I started in the gallery under Duncan. You were working for Chris Finlayson at the time as press secretary. Is that right? Do I have that right?
That was before Paddy was enlightened. And
yes.
He did a story about some people. It was his first week on TV because he had come from the Herald, where he's a really good journalist, really highly regarded reporter, and he was not ready-made TV talent. And he was doing a story, I think it was about access to a lake or something, and his big grab was having like a confused British man going like, "Te Kanga?" Which was one of the reasons for like not letting boats in during the algae spreading season or something. But I just always remember it because it was like that scene in Talladega Nights, his hands just kind of kept rising up, into the camera view. It's a real testament to hard work that he became one of the country's probably outstanding TV political journalists.
And for most people, you have to really sort of step it up, right? You have to get a little bigger and a little sort of get a clearer, louder voice and things. When you get onto TV, you have to sort of grow into that. Paddy had to scale it back a bit, I think. It was like, bring it down just a few notches. But don't lose the magic, because I think, his approach is magic. It's unpredictable, and that is a valuable commodity in politics.
And there's no part of you that could be tempted to report from the gallery again?
I don't think so. I'm not into the day-by-day anymore. I love it. I need it. It's valuable. But I like thinking about things over the longer term. I've been doing that for a long time now. So you'll see a character or an issue pop up and you think, yep, I know this. This is what that means. This is why it's happening. These are the interests. And that's the sort of reporting that I like to do now. It's analysis. It's putting things together. It's slightly in a different lane.
Well, look, that's fantastic. We're looking forward to seeing what you do next. Mm-hmm. What we're going to do next is depart the stage because our time's just about up. Hopefully, if he's still around, Hayden might play us off with some saxophone in a minute. What's left to do? There he is. Hayden and the reciprocal tariffs. Thanks to Annabelle. Thank you, Ben. Thank you so much, Rebecca. Thanks to Q Theatre and the team who put this all together from the spin-off, Tiahi Butler, Ben Fagan, Jen Follett, Anna Rafferty-Connell et al. Let's hear it. Hayden and the reciprocal tariffs.
The Spin-off Podcast Network,